Good morning, everybody, and thank you to all of you for joining the first in the series of workshops that Zen is going to be hosting over the lockdown. A very happy new year to you all, for everyone who's not spoken to us this year. As I'm sure you're all aware, obviously most schools are closed at the moment. So we wanted to help you take this time to upskill yourselves, learn more about the education sector, learn more about different parts of the education industry, and to gain some more skills and information to help you support all pupils when we eventually do go back into schools, hopefully after the February half term. Today's webinar is going to focus around what life is like in a special needs school. We'll cover a variety of different topics, and we will have some time for questions and answers at the end. So to introduce myself, my name's Olivia. I was an SEN support worker for a children's charity in Birmingham for a number of years. So I worked with children and young people up to 18, both in school and at home, who had a variety of different special needs. Most of my young people had a diagnosis of autism, but I also spent quite a few years working with children with complex medical needs and profound and multiple learning disabilities. I'm now the SEN lead at Zen Educate, so I work with senior leaders at our special needs schools, hospital schools and pupil referral units, helping them obviously hire you guys, hire staff who can support their pupils, but I also will be running a lot of these training sessions to share my experiences, share my my knowledge around special needs to help you upskill and learn a bit more about what it's like to support children with additional needs. I'm also joined by our marketing executive, Ross, this morning, who will be monitoring the chat box for questions. So although we've got a separate section at the end for questions, if you do have anything that crops up throughout the presentation, please use the chat box in the Zoom app, and just pop your questions in there. Ross will be monitoring them to make sure that we can have enough time to answer as many as possible at the end.
Yep, and just a quick thing, Olivia, one of the attendees just asked if you could turn the volume up a little bit, please. I
can try. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better, thank you.
All right, fabulous, sorry about that. So what we're going to cover today, I just want to caveat one thing. So I know a lot of you wanted information about practical techniques as to how you can support children with additional needs in school. We will be covering that slightly today, but there will be separate workshops where we'll go into much more detail about specific frameworks, specific techniques or methodologies that you can use to support children with additional needs in school. Today, we're really going to focus on how special schools are different to mainstream education, how the roles of a TA and a teacher differs in special ed, the communication and how the different curriculums are implemented at special schools versus mainstream education. So how special needs schools are different, sorry. I could not really put into words how different they are to mainstream schools. And for those of you who've not been into a special school before, I highly recommend taking a look at some of the school tour videos that are available on school websites. So obviously with lockdown, lots of schools have gone round and taken a video tour of their school, had a few interviews with teachers, etc., to help the students still feel more at home whilst they are at home. And it really gives you a good insight as to sort of how the physical buildings or campuses of special schools are set up differently to meet the needs of the pupils. So these are just a few of the schools that we work with. Many more as well, but please do check out their websites to look at videos, and obviously I'll try and go through some explanation as well. So the main obvious difference is that all children who attend a special needs school have special needs, and they would not be able to access mainstream education. So for those of you who've been in mainstream, obviously all schools try to make reasonable adaptations, and make inclusion for children with special needs. But for those who need to attend a specialist provision, the adaptations that a mainstream school could make are just not enough in order to meet that pupil's specific need, hence the need to go to a specialist institution. Some special schools will specialise even further and teach children with a specific type of additional need. So you may have autism specific schools, you may have schools for hearing impaired or visually impaired, and then you may have schools for children with very, very complex and severe sensory impairment or medical needs. But I would say that a majority of schools cater for a wide range of needs. So you'll have all kinds of different ability levels and conditions within the school. There are much higher staff ratios within a special school. So in your typical class, and also the class sizes are much, much smaller. So there's about 6 to 10 pupils on average. And within that class, you'd have one class teacher. And then on average, I would say you'd have between 2 to 4 teaching assistants. So you can see that it's almost a 2-to-1 ratio, sometimes a 1-to-1 ratio of teaching staff to students. Some students will have a 1-to-1 specified, or even a 2-to-1, as in 2 adults to 1 child, 2-to-1 specified in their EHCP plan. So there may even be more adults than students at some point in the classrooms. Some schools are all through, so that means that they start at EYFS, so at age 4 or 5, and they go all the way through to post-16 education. So obviously these schools are incredibly large. They usually have about 200 to 250 pupils. However, some schools are primary only and some schools are secondary only. We do have some colleges and further education schools that we work with that are specifically for children with additional needs, and they really focus around helping students get into work or get into independent living, etc. But we'll come on to that when I sort of more talk about the curriculum. From the videos that you will hopefully go away and have a look at, you'll see that the school is very purpose built and very, very accessible. So the classrooms will look vastly different to your mainstream classrooms, and there's also a number of specialist rooms throughout the school. So you'll see some sensory rooms, you may see some swimming pools, a soft play room, and cafes. And by cafes, I actually mean commercial kitchens. So one of our schools in North London, they have a cafe on site that is run by the students. So the students cook the food, the students are the baristas, they take orders, they do the service, etc. And again, it's all giving them skills to go into hospitality industry when they go on to leave school. Although the national curriculum is essential at most maintained special schools, the curriculum are individualised to each individual pupil, and we'll come on to this in more detail when I go through lessons in the curriculum. And the lessons are very, very sensory based, obviously depending on the ability level within your class, but there will be much more sensory active learning compared to mainstream schools, and we'll go through again more in detail when I give you an example lesson. So these are just a few of the specialised rooms that I mentioned. So the one in the top left is at the Village School in northwest London. So this is one of their rooftop playgrounds. Amazingly, this school has about 3 or 4 different playgrounds. It's huge. So you can see that there's a lot of equipment. It's very bright, very colourful. The ground is springy, so obviously children can't hurt themselves when they fall. And it's just a really fun place for them to be amongst the other lots of outdoor space that they have. The swimming pool here is at Tewkes School in Southwark. So all students will be expected to swim or have some water play throughout the week, and adults will be expected to get in the pool as well. It's a great sensory experience, really good for physical therapy, and you'll often have a lot of music playing. You'll have sensory projectors, lights going around the walls, and you'll have some pool toys like flotation devices, etc., to help the children with swimming. Really, really great experience. This is a sensory room. I couldn't find one from our specific schools, but this is what a sensory room could look like at one of your schools. So honestly, I absolutely love them. They're so calming. So you'd have very low, calming coloured lights. You've got bubble tubes here, which are like a really big favourite with children on the autism spectrum. You can have soft seating, so bean bags or soft play items to sit on. Disco balls, and then some textures here that children can inspect further, either with their hands, potentially with their face, and with their feet. However they like to explore the sensory world around them, they can use this space to calm and explore their different senses. And then this is a soft play room at Lyndon Bennett School in Hounslow, a big hit with all the primary age children. So again, you would generally have an allocated slot during the week to go into soft play. They can run around, burn off some energy, be a little bit boisterous. They can't hurt themselves. And also, great sensory. You've got the ball pit here, and some of the walls are sound, that if you hit them, they make a sound because they've got a device behind the back of them. But also this room can be sometimes used, as long as it's within school policy, for a calm down area. So if a child is distressed or upset and your allocated area for calming is in use by another child, or it's out of bounds, then they could come to soft play to calm. They can't hurt themselves, but of course they're still going to be supervised and monitored to ensure that they're looked after and are well. So what needs are there within a special school? As I said, some schools can specialise in any of these further, but you may also see all of these different conditions within one school or even one class. So the biggest need that is diagnosed these days amongst children is autism, and you will see a lot of children on the autism spectrum attending special schools. We do have a number of autism specialist schools. Some of them use different techniques in order to support them. So we do have some ABA schools. We have the VBA, which is verbal behaviour analysis. But there's lots of different ways in which you could support a child with autism. And as I said, there will be a separate workshop on that as well. Mild to severe learning needs. So this is more around the child is significantly behind where they should be chronologically in terms of their academic and general development. So that could include conditions like Down syndrome. It could have been from an acquired brain injury, or it could have been from complications at birth or during pregnancy, etc. ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We do also have a separate workshop on that. Profound and multiple learning disabilities, or PMLD, and complex medical needs. These children, as I'll go on to explain, are the most vulnerable and generally the most unwell children that you will come across in school. There are some schools that cater specifically for these children's needs because they are so complex, but I'll go on to talk about these lovely students in just a sec. SEMH, so social, emotional and mental health needs. Typically, children who have the main diagnosis of SEMH would go to a pupil referral unit or to an alternative provision. But there are a lot of conditions, such as autism, that are highly linked to things like anxiety or OCD. But also a lot of children, especially when they get to sort of key stage 2, key stage 3, have reported social, emotional and mental health needs because they've experienced trauma or they've experienced lots of bullying, and they generally have quite low self-esteem because they're starting to understand that they're very different to their peers or to other neurotypical children. And so there is a big focus on mental well-being and positive attitudes in special schools, and a big focus on personal, on PSHE as well. And then there's many, many more. I can't name how many conditions I've come across in my classrooms. And you may come across some children with conditions that haven't even been named in medicine yet. Or you may come across children who have a 1 in a million condition, and the best thing I can say for that is to understand a little bit about the condition if you can, with some Googling, but just get to know that child, get to know how it affects them specifically, and then you can work with them to develop the various areas of their understanding, their academics, their social and emotional development as well. So moving on from that, pupil profiles are incredibly helpful, especially if you're walking into a brand new classroom and a brand new school that you've never been to before. So pupil profiles are like a little Bible about a certain child, and it gives you everything you kind of need to know. So obviously it would give their name, their next of kin and their doctors. It's really important to know the emergency procedures as well for that child. So if they do have any medical needs or any medication that they're on, let's say if they are epileptic, you need to know the emergency procedures for if that child has a seizure. So it may be that this child doesn't seize that often. And so if they do have a seizure in school, it's 999 straight away. However, if they have quite frequent seizures, and some children can have hundreds of seizures a day, it might be that you leave them for 5 minutes to hopefully get through it. And if they don't come out of it in 5 minutes, then you call 999. That will all be in their pupil profile. You'll have their primary and secondary diagnoses. So, you may have a child with autism, but who also has secondary diagnosis of ADHD, or you may have a child with cerebral palsy who also has a diagnosis of a mild learning disability. And those would then tie into what they have difficulties with, but also what they can excel in. It's really great to understand what they find easy to do or what they find that they can do very well, so that you can try and tie that into as much of their learning as possible to build up their self-esteem, but also to highlight the areas that they have difficulty with, so that you can then work on those with them together and in line with their targets for that term. Common behaviours, that's a really great one, especially if you do have children who are prone to aggression. Some of them may have triggers and sort of indication behaviours that they're getting distressed. So I have a young man who, if he's getting upset, will start punching himself in the back of the head. And I know that, okay, like he's getting really distressed now, I need to move him away from that particular activity or from that particular person or that room before he then starts getting aggressive towards me or other children. One thing I want to say about common behaviours is that they're not updated daily. So I would always recommend speaking to the class teacher if you're doing supply, or speaking to the TAs in the classroom who have been working with that young person for a number of years or months or however long, just to understand if anything new has come up. So I went in to do supply a couple of weeks ago to a special school, and I met a young person that I knew. I'd done supply with him before, and I knew a little bit about him and his diagnosis. He was autistic, but they said, oh, by the way, new behaviour that's not in his plan was that whenever he goes to the toilet, he likes to unroll the entire loo roll and shove it down into the water and play with it. So you've got to be really quick to make sure that you sort of protect that, and so that doesn't happen. But obviously they just hadn't had time to put that in his behaviour plan. So great thing to know. And then motivators. I'll come into how to use motivators in lessons, but it will be a list of things that children find really motivating and that can help them engage in activities that are otherwise quite uninteresting to them or might be quite difficult. So this is an example of a rough pupil profile. It's not the most extensive. Usually the pupil profiles are 2 or 3 pages long, but this is sort of a quick overview of a young person at a school, and you can sort of see how it would help you understand a little bit about how to work with them individually. So I'll briefly touch on autism, and one thing I wanted to mention was the research regarding autism is forever changing. It's one of the most researched areas because when we learn more about the children, how they present, and the neurochemistry and the neurology behind autism, we just learn more and more and more. So sometimes people can think that autism is a spectrum disorder, but it's not less to more. It can be that you may have a child who is completely verbal, can speak in full sentences at the neurotypical level of their age, but they may have a really hard time with sensory processing information, or they may have real trouble with fine motor skills, for example. And so it's really understanding the individual profile of that child with autism, and understanding where their impairments are, and where their strengths lie. So try to think of it more as the shape on the right, than sort of just being on a linear spectrum. So autism is a lifelong developmental disability, and it primarily affects how a person communicates and relates to other people, and how they make sense of the world around them. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. As I said, the autism workshop is far, far more in depth, so I do recommend coming along to that. But primarily, a child with autism will have impairments in their social interaction, so relating to other people, communicating with other people, impairments in communication. Some of you may have children who are non-verbal, but also they may have struggles with interpreting body language or gestures or tone of voice or facial expressions, which are things that you and I, do every day, and potentially, we take those for granted. And then imagination and flexible thinking, that's usually very difficult for a child with autism. And if you've got any children with autism in your classrooms at the moment, you'll see generally that they very much like routine and structure, and they don't like unexpected change or change at all, really. And so it's really important to be able to put that structure in place, and we'll come on to a few things that you can do there later on, as well as in the other workshops. Similarly, they've got very restrictive, repetitive patterns of behaviour, so they may do certain little behaviours that they do when they're excited, or when they're overwhelmed, or when they're underwhelmed, actually. And again, it's sort of bringing them back into their own little world, and sort of trying to control the outside stimulus around them. Often they'll have very, very particular interests in activities or topics, etc., that they like to do or talk about all the time, which is fantastic for them, but also we need to help them broaden their horizons and learn different activities, different interests, that they can do in order to build on that social interaction and flexible thinking. And it's estimated that about 1 in every 100 people can be diagnosed with autism in the UK. PMLD, so profound multiple learning difficulties or disabilities. As the name suggests, these children have multiple learning, physical or medical needs. And schools who cater for children with PMLD, they're more geared toward providing a very high quality of life, and supporting their therapies and medical development and communication development, etc., versus teaching academics to these children. Obviously, they're still teaching there, but it's helping them explore what they can do. So a majority of PMLD students will communicate non-verbally. We'll come on to a few different communication methods that you can use with children with PMLD, and we'll actually meet a young person who would be classified as having PMLD, and how we can look at how he communicates, which is just astounding, really. Students with PMLD often require specialist equipment to help them. So that might be oxygen tubes or a tracheotomy tube, which is where a tube is inserted into the throat to help them breathe. They may require peg feeding, which is a tube directly into the stomach to help with feeding, because they may have esophageal difficulties in swallowing. And then hoists, which is where you're helping a child in and out of their wheelchair to access activities in the classroom or access areas of the curriculum. And it's also great for physical therapy to get them out of their chair every now and then during the day, so that they can have a good old stretch, and so that they can also then engage, obviously, with the therapies that the therapists will do. And children are often taught nearly 100% sensory based. It's aimed at introducing new sensations to them slowly, so that it's not too overwhelming, helping them explore their bodies in space, and also developing communication strategies so that they can still tell you what they need, what they want, what they're feeling, etc. So the role of a TA in a special needs school doesn't differ too much from that in a mainstream school. Your main goal is always for everybody to promote the safeguarding and well-being of every child. And that is fundamentally, that is everybody's responsibility, to ensure that children who are in school are well looked after and thriving in school. Supporting children in lessons, so obviously making sure that the lessons and the activities are adapted to meet their individual needs, but also participating yourself. One of the greatest things that children will respond to is seeing their teacher and their teaching assistants get involved with the lessons. And certainly if you've got children who are quite resistant to engaging, get up and do it yourself, and you're setting the example. So at my school, we did yoga every morning for half an hour, and we would obviously all push the tables back to make a big space in the middle of the classroom, and everybody would be expected to participate. And it's also great for the teachers as well. Nice relaxing start to the day. You're aiding the physical, social and academic development of every child, obviously in line with their individual targets for outlined in their education healthcare plans, but also their physical therapy, which will be set with the therapists and any of the medical staff on site as well. You'll be communicating with parents or carers through homeschool books or exercise books. So you might be annotating their work, or you may be, they may have a dedicated diary where you give an account of how their day went, any causes for concern, or any fantastic progresses that they made that day. That can be then sent home to the parents. And likewise, parents can also write in new behaviours that they've seen at home, or new trends that they've seen at home that they may now see in school. So you're always keeping that line of communication open. You're always providing feedback and assistance to class teachers and additional staff that are around school, very similar to mainstream there. And attending regular continuous professional development. So one of the great things about special schools is, because you need so much specialist knowledge and training and experience to effectively support the pupils, they do weekly, if not daily, CPD. So you may have an hour after school, one day a week, where you go through the TEACH framework or the SPELL framework for autism, or you may do a Makaton session or a British Sign Language session. But even in the middle of at the beginning of the day, you may just go through some more PECS cards, or you may go through some ways in which you can support a child with visual impairment, for example. So definitely make use of all of that, because it's all free training for you guys, and really, really helps you build your skill set. And have fun. The best thing, special schools, as I'll come on to say, they are very, very difficult, but they are incredibly fun to work in. And I'll go through just some of the sort of highlights that I've had working in special schools before as well. So communication, as I said, you and I are used to verbally communicating and looking at facial expressions and gestures and body language to understand somebody's intention or somebody's feelings or what somebody's saying. But for some children who are attending special needs schools, that's really difficult, and they may not communicate in that way. But it is every child's right to be able to communicate something. And there are many different ways in which total communication can be implemented in schools to help with that. So the first one is to speak quite simply when you're speaking to children at special needs schools. And that's for a majority. There will be some children who can communicate completely neurotypically, and you don't obviously want to patronize them, but for when you understand the level of understanding of your child, certainly potentially in the younger year groups, I would say that using simple language where you're communicating the basic need of what you need them to do is best to make sure that they're not overwhelmed. So if I want somebody to come in and take their coat off and put it on the peg, I would just say coat off. Once they've done that, then on the peg, and that's it. Then they can go into class and all done. Rather than saying like, please can you come in and take your coat off, then put it on the peg. It's just a bit too much for them to understand. PECs and visual aid cards. So this is what you can see here on the right-hand side. So picture exchange communication system is PECs. And these are really, really useful for children who don't communicate verbally. They will be used to seeing these pictures and they know what the pictures mean. And therefore, they can show you the card, or they can point to the card in their communication book. Or what is quite common in special schools is that you'll have a lanyard with the core communication cards on it, and you can flick through those to either communicate with a child, or a child can come up to you, take your lanyard and show you what they want. And it can be, you know, these little cartoons, which are really handy, or it could actually be photographs if people or places within the school that they want to go that they are familiar with. Makaton or British Sign Language. So Makaton is a form of sign language which is used in conjunction with spoken language. And it's a much simpler way to sign than using full BSL. And I would always recommend learning some core signs that you can use when you're speaking. So there's lots of videos on YouTube and Twitter that we'll link at the bottom where you could go and use these, but I would always use them just in general sentences. So if you were saying on a Monday, you know, we're finishing off the same topic that we did on Friday, I would just say, so last week, what did we learn? Just little signs like that. Or if you're pointing out a child to answer something, you can sign the first letter of their name. So it might be Lucy, you know, give us your answer, or you know, just sort of little things like that, so that you're also directing attention towards that child. British Sign Language is almost exclusively used in schools for the hearing impaired or for the deaf. There are courses online and courses in person, I still think, going, where you can get a qualification in BSL, but obviously it is a completely new language, and so it does take quite a few months to be able to learn. iPads are incredible for communication. There is a number of different softwares that you can use, and it's quite similar to PECs. There is one, I think it's called ProLocro 2 or ProQuolo 2, which is where the child can select different visual aid cards, put a sentence together, and then the iPad will speak it for them. There's also obviously the Notes app, or lots of different apps that you can use for communication. And I actually got a lovely story of a young man that I worked with who was 2 to 1, so 2 adults to 1 child. He was severely autistic, nonverbal, and quite prone to be very, very aggressive. He could communicate through shouts and noises, and sort of obviously having to get to know him, you can infer what those mean. But because he was quite aggressive and could sort of break things very, very easily, he was incredibly strong. We didn't usually let breakable things near him, so including iPads, because obviously they're very expensive for the school. One day he managed to get a hold of another child's iPad, and he opened up the Notes app, and he wrote full sentences, and he was actually asking like, what's going on with the Scottish referendum? So this was obviously quite a while ago, but he just said, what's the latest with the Scottish referendum? And he wanted to know loads about politics at that time, and me and the other TA were just absolutely astounded that he was communicating completely neurotypically through the iPad, and it had unlocked a whole new world of communication for him. And so, you know, obviously we had a conversation with him. We sort of set down some ground rules about iPads, and that if he was feeling upset or frustrated, the iPad was out of bounds to be broken. He had to find something else or another way to manage his emotions. But actually, having this communication system with him, his frustration went down, his behaviors went down, and he was very rarely aggressive again. And actually, he went on to college. And I don't actually know if he's now in work, but he went on to gain qualifications because he could communicate now. And so it just completely unlocked a world for him and for his mum as well. His mum struggled at home, and having now got iPads at home, they can communicate with their son for the first time. And he was 17 when he did that. So for the first time in 17 years, they could hear their son communicate. And then eye gaze boards. So I'm not the best person to talk about eye gaze boards, so I'm going to introduce you to a lovely man called Luke. He goes to a school in Wales called Ysgolyderi, and Luke has what we would classify as a profound and multiple learning difficulty, and we're going to meet him through a video and sort of see how he communicates using eye gaze boards. So, you will all be sent a core communication textbook as well at the end of this. So we have got some pecs that you can print out, laminate, and then use in school. It's got core vocabulary, things around colours, rooms, personal care, etc. And it's a really great way to start communicating with non-verbal children and to help them communicate their needs and wants. So great, let's meet Luke.
Knowing each individual pupil is a big priority in Ysgolyderi, and helping the children to express themselves is Lisa Rees-Renshaw.
Communication is every child's right. No matter what level they're at, they've got every right to be able to communicate something. And that's our responsibility in school, to make sure we give them the tools to be able to do that. They don't want you to talk for them. They want to talk for themselves. They want to be heard. And whether it's a single word, a big long sentence, a scream, a shout, whatever it is, they are trying to communicate with you. And it's our job to listen to them and try and interpret what they are trying to tell us. Okay, let's get you set up.
My name is Luke. I am 15 years old and I live in Llantwit. I have a funny, cheeky, rude and dirty sense of humour. I am crazy, silly, funny but still humble. I have a condition called schizophrenia, which means I have a hole in my brain. A bit like a donut, but I have sprinkles. I hate it when people patronize me, especially when people talk to me like a baby. It makes me feel hurt and uncomfortable. There are some people who don't patronize me. My mum, my family, my school staff and my friends, who accepts me for who I am. It makes me feel humble.
So this is Luke's eye gaze. So when he looks at one of these cells, it will activate. You can see a little timer going round, and then it will activate that cell.
I like watching documentaries on YouTube, having banter with people, talking about religion, having meaningful conversations, watching comedians, and being with my family.
Oh. So you can see there that, you know, Luke, although he's got a profound medical condition and having a hole in his brain, he is communicating just like a neurotypical 15-year-old. He's got sarcasm, he's got the jokes, and, you know, if you listen to some of his interests, he's got a real thirst for knowledge. And I think it's really important that you know, when we do go into a special school, we may see children who have got very complex needs and may appear to, you know, have, you know, quite a low functioning ability. But actually, when you get to know them, they are, you know, just like you and I, in terms of what they like to do, what they can do. And it's our job to help them reach that potential, as I'll come on to later. And you know, the children will really respect you, as Luke said, that, you know, we don't patronize them. We treat them, you know, just as the same as we would any neurotypical child. We're just there to help them access absolutely everything that they want to be able to do. So on to the curriculum and to lessons. So the curriculum at all maintained special schools that are run by your local authority do have to follow the national curriculum. However, obviously with special needs, you will have the freedom to teach this national curriculum in line with a pupil-specific need. So you are there to make reasonable adjustments for every single pupil to make sure that they can access this activity in line with where they are in their attainment. Something you'll often hear is P levels or P scales, and these are a set of descriptors to assess and record students with special needs who do not yet reach level 1 of the national curriculum, so they are pre-national curriculum level. And I'll go on to how you can potentially differentiate for those children in an example lesson. Moving on to sort of like the upper key stages, so key stage 3, key stage 4, and post 16, you will do a lot of preparing for adulthood or preparing for independence. And so you will potentially, like I said, be coming across those cafes that I said where children run the whole thing, supervised of course, but you're teaching them those independent life skills. You'll be potentially adapting some of your lessons to be real world situations. So if you're teaching maths to key stage 3 and 4, and you're teaching about addition or subtraction, you can make it relevant for budgeting. So if they've got X amount of money and this is how much rent costs, this is how much bills cost, how much money have you got left over at the end of every month? Something like that to teach them about the life skills to live independently. There are some schools as well who have a life skills flat. And by that, I actually mean that they've got an entire replica flat or hotel room inside school. And it's incredible to see, actually. And so the children will go into the life skills flat, and they'll be taught about cleaning and how to safely store cleaning products, or they might be asked to cook a meal for their friends. They might be asked to make the bed, do the ironing, etc., so that they can then live independently or go into hospitality and work in that sector as well. And as I said before, there's also a big focus on PSHE and well-being. So creating a positive mental well-being environment and being able to share and talk about emotions, talk about self-esteem, and also teach children about what emotions feel like. For some children, especially on the autism spectrum, labeling and understanding feelings can be really difficult. So teachers will be talking about how certain things make you feel, when you feel a certain way, what behaviours do you want to do? And certainly if you've got children who respond potentially aggressively, teaching them alternative ways to rechannel that into something more pro-social. And this is an example from one of our schools in East London, where they actually create pathways for their different categories, I guess, of special needs. So you have your sensory learners, who are the children with profound multiple learning difficulties. You have your connecting learners, so children who are slightly more able and able to connect different concepts on the autism spectrum. And then your active learners, so children who will generally learn more through doing lots of physical work, being engaged in activities physically. And those are generally either children on the autism spectrum or with severe learning needs. So certainly at an all-through school, and certainly at schools which teach a wide variety of needs, whole school planning is quite difficult. And so the school will split into heads of department for EYFS, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, etc. And that head of department will be responsible for working with their team of staff that they look after to create a personalised education to meet the needs of the children within their key stage. When you start a new topic with a new class, what I found really helpful was understanding the level of what each pupil has of that specific topic. Like I said, there might be a child with autism in your class who is absolutely obsessed with space, and no doubt they will know more than you because that is their obsession and they have researched it for as long as they've known. And one thing that helped me was at the start of every topic, let's do a mind map. So certainly for your verbal learners, You can do a mind map, and you can then say like, okay, well, what do you know about space? What do you know about planets? What do you know about stars? What do you know about rockets, for example? And then every child can come up and annotate or verbalize, and the TA can write it down what they know. And then you can annotate who wrote or said what to make sure that you're then differentiating based on their level of understanding. Where possible, children should be able to write in their exercise books when they're completing an activity, or if they're completing an activity on a separate worksheet, you can then stick it in. However, some children who may have severe impairment in fine motor skills, and so who find holding a pencil really difficult or writing very difficult, you can take photos of the lesson that's been adapted for them, and stick the photos into their exercise books to prove that they have done that, and they've understood the exact same concept, and then you can just annotate what the task was, how it was adapted, and how much support that child needed in order to complete the task. What's also worked quite well is using things that are very familiar for these children. So traffic lights are going to be familiar. Emojis has worked quite well to assess understanding. So at the end of each lesson, you could hold up a smiley face, and people who found their lesson very easy and fun, and they could understand everything, they can put their hand up for that. Then you could have sort of like a mid, not sure, or an amber, and then you can have a sad face or a red light. And this really helps children to help you assess their level of engagement without them having to articulate it themselves. You'd also find some children might not understand the words to use, or they might be a bit shy. And so just using traffic light systems has worked really well. So lessons in a special school, they are very different to mainstream. They are often quite short, based on sort of just generally trying to keep children engaged for 60 minutes is quite difficult. So they might be sort of 15 to 30 minutes long. Very sensory based. So in my school, we did a lot of YouTube, a lot of interactive whiteboards, lots of singing, very tactile work. So there was always lots of Lego, lots of Play-Doh or sensory materials around that we could incorporate into lessons. So when we were talking every morning, when we were doing our hello and our greetings after yoga, we would go, what's the weather? And rather than sort of just looking at pictures, we would actually get out objects. So if it was sunny, we had everybody put on a sun hat or some sunglasses. If it was windy, we had a big fan that we would put in front of the children's faces if they liked it. Obviously they can say no if they don't. If it was cold or icy, we had some ice cubes that they could play with, and etc. Like, it just makes it more fun, more engaging, and they're also making that connection between feeling and the outside weather. 5 to 10 minutes work can equal a 5-minute motivator. That's roughly standard, but obviously in line with every school policy. So as I mentioned in Pupil Profiles, every child will have their own motivator, and it has to be something that's really motivating, as in it would make you engage in something you don't want to do so that you could have it. So it might be, trying to think of one of the children I had in my school had an obsession with Angry Birds and also using the school staff room printer, because it's a child going in the staff room, he feels a little bit important. And so we said that he was quite a difficult child to engage in a lot of work. He was on the autism spectrum. He was minimally verbal, but you could have a conversation with him. And so we would always say, okay, Max, no, it's not Max, but Max, 10 minutes handwriting, then 5 minutes Angry Birds. And he knew then that if he did 10 minutes of handwriting, he could spend 5 minutes going on the laptop and printing off Angry Birds on the school staff room printer. So he would get to use my fob, he would get to go out of the classroom, and then he would like to cut them up and stick them in his book as like a sort of a reward chart of his own, really. Every day is outlined on a visual timetable. These are fantastic for creating structure and routine for children with autism. So every child will have their own schedule with their picture above it, and it would all be set out almost minute by minute as to what they're doing throughout the day. So it can be arrive at school, wash hands, snack time, toilet break, and then obviously all the lessons in between. And these are all using the PECS cards. And then periodically throughout the day, the teacher can go, okay, children, check your schedules. And they would take off, because they're all stuck on Velcros, they would take off the lessons and the activities that had happened and put them in the finished box, so that they could then clearly see what was going to happen throughout the rest of the day and reduce some of that anxiety that they might have about unpredictability, for example. So this is an example Key Stage 2 or Key Stage 3 English and life skills lesson. So the objective in English is to be able to write clear and sequential instructions. You've got a class of 8 pupils, a mix of special needs. So in this class, you've got some children with Down syndrome, some on the autism spectrum, and a child with cerebral palsy. And they're a mixed ability class, working from P scales to level 2. So introducing the activity, using the interactive whiteboard, you can have children come up by name when they're called to drag and select items needed for sandwich making. So we're going to be asking them to make instructions for how to make a sandwich. And they are selecting the ingredients and then ordering the instructions on the whiteboard by dragging them. So for the children with P scales, when they go into individual work, they will be working with a teaching assistant, and they will be given PECS cards or visual aid cards, and they need to arrange those in order on the table as to how to make a sandwich. For our level 1 students, they're given a writing frame with a word bank at the bottom of the keywords that they need to use within the sentences, and they're given a structure, so the title or the recipe, the ingredient list, and then a lines underneath for where they need to write the instructions. Level 2 students are also given a frame, but they have no word bank, and they are expected to work independently as possible and use more complex language with connecting words to write in full sentences. I might also give my level 2 students a bit of a more difficult sandwich to make. So for my P levels and level 1s, it might be a jam sandwich, but then for level 2, it might be a cheese and ham sandwich, for example. And then once that task is complete, the students can go to the food tech room and then make that sandwich according to instructions that they've written. So it's also teaching them how to follow a recipe, to teach them some life skills about making food for themselves independently, of course, obviously being supported by TAs or LSAs. So the multidisciplinary teams, as you know, in every school, you've got a whole team of people who make that school work. You've got your SLT, you have your teachers, your TAs, your cleaners, your midday supervisors, etc. And it's, you know, one big family to help the children have a wonderful day at school. You have the same at special schools, but you'll have more specialized staff as well. So you will have therapists come in quite regularly, or actually just be on site permanently to help with occupational therapy, physical therapy, or speech and language. So you'll be working with them, and your child might have dedicated time to go out to see them. You might have behaviour mentors or specialist mentors who support children's behaviour. You may have ABA therapists come in if your child is working on an ABA programme. Nurses, so you'll have a much more complex medical team who are responsible for a wide variety of medical needs. It might be things like medication administration, it might be tube feeding for the children with PMLD, checking oxygen tanks or checking oxygen levels of children. They'll also be responsible potentially for healthy eating programs and making sure that children are gaining weight or maintaining weight as they should be. But also, because of the nature of some of these children, they might have medical emergencies on site. And so nurses are there to support you with medical emergency support should a child have a seizure or have difficulty breathing, etc. You may have subject-specific therapists come in, or experts, so music therapists or art therapists come in to do immersive lessons with the children. Believe it or not, you might have hairdressers. So Escoladeri, which is the school where Luke went to, they have a salon on site, and they have a specific hairdresser who comes in to work with the children to give them a haircut. certainly for children with autism and sensory processing needs, having a haircut can be extremely anxiety inducing. Some children have described it as actually feeling like you're actually cutting them, like their skin, or they don't like the scratchy feeling, they don't like being touched, and so having a haircut can take 2 or 3 hours, and it's much nicer to be able to do that on site in an area that they're familiar with somebody who understands autism or understands special needs, to help the children have that personal care. Speaking of, you'll also have personal care assistants. So some children may still be in nappies or diapers due to their medical conditions, or they haven't been able to be toilet trained just yet. So throughout the day, some children may need to go off with personal care assistants or teaching assistants to be changed and to be cleaned. But you may have some additional people who do that specifically as their job on site for 2 or 3 hours a day. So the practical reality. I absolutely love working in special needs, but it's been the most rewarding area of my career. But there are some realities that we need to be addressing about working in special ed. So it is incredibly hard work. And it's very emotional at times. You will have, amazing highs, but you will also have some pretty deep lows sometimes, and it is exhausting at the end of the day, because you may have some children who are very challenging in their behaviour, or you may have children who are runners. I'll come on to those in a second, and you may end up, chasing children around the school all day, just trying to get them to engage in a lesson. You may have some children who are sadly quite ill, and who have life-limiting conditions. Certainly in PMLD, you may also have some children who are needing or on end-of-life care. It's an emotional job. Certainly when you're seeing children, I've had quite a few children sadly pass away from my schools, and they were 6 or 7 years old. And so you've got to be ready for that. But obviously, at the end of the day, we're here to give them that quality of life whilst they are with us, and to be able to give them the physical therapies and the wonderful sensory experiences that they can have and that they can access whilst they're with us in school. Children can demonstrate their feelings by hitting, screaming, crying, not engaging, and it's hard for all of us to experience that, but don't take it personally. They are trying to express something to you, and potentially they don't know how to tell you any other way than to hit you or to spit at you, but you will always be supported by people around you, and I'll come on to the great stuff in a minute. But don't take it personally as an attack on you. I think, be strong, definitely. You may have runners. There's 2 types of runners. There's runners who run away from you or try and run around school because they know it will get a reaction, and they know that they'll also get some attention from it. And then you've got real runners. And I mean runners as in they will run to the other side of the city if they could. Those are children that you really do have to keep an eye on. And certainly the children, they're not silly. They will find locks and on doors and find keys and find fobs that you didn't know existed. And although obviously special schools are tried to be as safe as possible, you really do have to keep an eye on the real runners. For anybody who knows Alton Towers, the theme park, I was on a school trip once and we did lose a child at Alton Towers, and it probably added 10 years off my life. But we eventually did find him, but he had run and we had no way of finding him apart from when he was escorted in by a member of staff. But yeah, be careful. And things may take time. certainly, you know, children with special needs develop at different rates, and it may take you 3 or 4 years to make a breakthrough with a child about using PECS or using sign language, or it may take you 5 years to make a breakthrough in terms of them asking for help. But when you make that breakthrough, I promise you it'll be the best feeling you've ever had. And to move on to the nice, fun stuff, you are helping society's most vulnerable children to reach their full potential. And you are helping them access activities and experiences that were not available to them prior to coming to school. And that's a fantastic feeling. And like I said, seeing a child make a breakthrough is honestly one of the best feelings ever. When my 17-year-old child at school started communicating and I saw his behavior decrease dramatically, I was so emotional. And you know, children were no longer scared of him, and he was able to make friends. He's gone on to college, etc. So, and you know, it's all thanks to sort of working with him tirelessly, and it'll be the same for all of you when you make your breakthroughs with children. You'll see children grow and discover new skills. You know, certainly if you're in all through school, you may see a child come in through EYFS and leave at Key Stage 5, a completely new child, and you will have helped them find those new areas and those new skills. And also the teams at special schools are incredibly supportive. They're wonderful, wonderful people. They genuinely care about the children, and they will become more like family. And I think because obviously you're all going through difficult times, you do have a lot of support. And I think that all of the SLT as well at every special school I've been to have been incredibly approachable in terms of just offering you support. And this is one of my favourite quotes from the head teacher of Escola. All their lives they've been told what they can't do, and we're here to show them what they can do. And that really hit home for me, where, you know, we try to live in a very inclusive world, but sadly not everything is accessible for every child, and our schools, or special schools in particular, are there to show them that they can do anything they want to be able to do, and we will make any reasonable adjustment to help them do that. So support and resources, I'll quickly flick through these so that we've got some time for questions. Always ask for help if you need it. Nobody will think any, you know, worse of you or think that, you know, you're not capable at your job. Always ask for help if you need it. You know, that's the only way that we learn, and we're all there for the children at the end of the day. Weekly CPD is there. Use it. It's there to help you, to help others, and to share your knowledge and to share your experiences as well. We're here. I'm here. The blog has got some wonderful SEN resources on it, and we will be doing a few more workshops. We've got a positive mental health one coming up next week. We've also got behaviour management and autism awareness, and then teaching children with complex needs and sensory impairment on the horizon as well. So keep an eye out over lockdown for more workshops like this one. Twinkle and Tears are fantastic. They have lots of free resources. Teachers, TAs, you may already be signed up to buy resources from them, but here's a really good link for an explanation of P scales and P levels. And then Twitter is also great for BSL and Makaton. If you follow, if you follow the Makaton charity on Twitter, they do a daily sign. And there's also plenty of YouTube videos. Mr. Tumble is great. I know he's not liked by everybody because it can be quite annoying at times, but Mr. Tumble does all of his CBB shows in Makaton, and so it's great to learn to learn it. And then BSL, there's plenty of YouTube tutorials as well. And so to quickly summarize, and I know I'm sorry I've run over a little bit, but we will have time for questions. Special schools cater obviously specifically for children with special needs. You are there to help adapt the curriculum to individual needs. It's hard work, but there will be many highs, and you will always receive lots of training and support to make sure that you can consistently be there for the evolving needs of your students. So quick few questions that were really common when people were signing up for this workshop is, do I need qualifications to work as in a special school? No, you don't need any specific qualifications. Some schools ask for a level 2. However, the biggest thing that special schools ask me for is people with great attitude, positive outset, positive attitude, and who want to get stuck in and who want to commit. Commitment is the biggest thing, because obviously these children have difficulty in forming relationships, and they want to have somebody consistently there for them through their journey in education. And so, you know, you need to be able to commit to it, take the highs with the lows, and ensure that you can remain there to help them. Experience really does help, and I would say that, so I did a psychology degree myself. And I would say that psychology and an understanding of, you know, certain conditions really helps as well. But you do not need any specific qualifications to work as a TA in a special school. Can I do my NQT year in a special school? Absolutely. And you can also do your initial teacher training in special ed as well. And one of our advisors, Helen, actually set up one of the first ITTs in special schools. Alongside the DFE. So if you want to know more about sort of getting into special teaching, then do let me know. And how can I find out more about supporting children with special needs? Attend the workshops that we're going to be running, and there's plenty of information out there on the internet. There's lots of documentaries, there's lots of inside special schools, you know, sort of life in a special school documentaries on the BBC or on YouTube. And I would recommend, you know, if you can, just try and volunteer, or try and set up, you know, try and go to a special school whenever you can. I know it's not possible at the moment, but just getting an insight into how different it is fantastic. So I'm going to open up the floor now to any other questions. I hope Ross has been helping me and collating some questions there. So Ross, have we got any ones that stand out at the moment?
We do, yeah. Like, first of all, just got to say it's an incredibly interesting workshop, and absolutely loved the story about the boy who was on the spectrum who managed to communicate through the iPad. It's just incredible. And the first question is, do you know if the attendees will get a certificate after this workshop?
So there won't be a certificate, but we can send around all of the resources that you've seen today. So we'll send around this slide deck along with a recording of this. So if you want to listen to me again, there'll be a recording. And we've also got some example lesson plans, example communication books, and also some, you know, I have some links to some resources as well. That you can find online. We are looking to do CPD accredited courses in the future, where you will receive a certificate to say that you've attended those, but those are currently in process, but keep your eyes out for those.
Brilliant, thanks. And the other question that came through was, if you find a child like Luke, you know, who doesn't like to be patronised, are there any tips for when we approach and meet the SEN student for the first time, if we haven't met them before and we don't know their needs, without being too patronising? Sure,
yeah, it's a good question. I think if you're going into a brand new class, or you're meeting a student for the first time, always try and get there a little bit earlier so that you can talk to the student, so that you can talk to the teachers or any other support staff in that school about that specific child. I think that really, really helps, because if you're just going to meet the child straight up for the first time, it can be really hard to know immediately what their level of understanding is. So definitely speak to the teacher or the support staff. Once you then meet the child, I would go in with more of the assumption of that they understand more than you think they do. That's what's helped me in the past. So I would always, you know, potentially it's hard to not, definitely simplify your language, but not too much that you're, you know, certainly if you're meeting a child in Key Stage 3 or 4, don't talk to them like they're 3 or 4 years old. So just, you know, introduce yourself normally, try to use your normal tone of voice, you know, don't go too high, and sort of, you know, come across as like a little bit of a baby talk. introduce yourself normally, and then obviously as you get to know the young person throughout the day, you'll understand how you can then adapt your approach to making sure that they understand. And one thing, actually thinking about a young adult that I worked with for quite a while who has PMLD, he could say, I think he was 25, but he could say maybe 4 or 5 words, which was yes, no, and then the names of his family. I just spoke to him normally, and you will have to, put things into question form a lot more. So rather than saying, do you want a drink? Or you could say, do you want a drink? He would say yes. You would then say, okay, do you want tea? No. Do you want coffee? Yes. It's a lot more questioning when it comes to working with children with PMLD. Yeah, I think that's the easiest way I could answer that.
Yeah, thanks. And next question is, if a child screams or cries to gain your attention, what's the best thing to do?
Ooh, good question. So if it's for attention, as in, there's 2 different things there, right? So if a child is screaming or crying for attention because they are upset or they are hurt or they are that's a very different question to if they're screaming because they want to get attention just for attention's sake, if you know what I mean. So if a child is screaming, usually what I've seen in special schools is that they don't accept screaming. So we outline a behavior plan where we say, if a child is screaming, we would just say stop, or you could use a PEX to say stop, no screaming. If they are continuing to get upset, then obviously you do need to find out what's upsetting them, and if it's something within the classroom that you can remove, then you can remove that specific thing. Mm-hmm. If they are it really depends on the child. I'm trying to think of sort of a way in which I could give like a generalized answer. If they are just doing it for attention's sake, I would generally take the ignore but not supervise approach. So it might be that this child is going to have a meltdown for the next 30 minutes and they're going to cry because they don't want to do something that you want them to do. So they might not want to come inside, or they might not want to leave soft play. Obviously following your behavior management policy, but I would also just ignore them, let them cry, let them have their meltdown. And then once they finally sort of, sorted themselves out, explain, we're going to leave soft play, or we're going to the classroom, and then, just take them with you and almost just sort of leave it, really.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And quite a commonly asked question today is, how can people go about going into special school teaching now, if they're interested?
So if they're interested, I missed a slide. If anybody wants to contact me about working in special schools through Zen, or wants to know anything more about special needs in general, my email address is here. So please just drop me a line. I'm available all day today, and then all half day tomorrow and half day Friday. So please just let me know if you've got any questions. If you do have any specific schools that you want to know a little bit more about, or if you just want to know about more where you can find more information, just drop me a line, and I will be here.
Brilliant, thanks. And it's possible for them to teach on a flexible basis as well, isn't it? Some people they can only work some hours.
Sometimes. So lots of special schools will often ask for full-time, and that is purely because the children need so much consistency and support throughout their entire day at school. There are some schools which say, like, they might have an extra child in on a particular day, therefore they need another teaching assistant. So they might be sort of, a part-time basis, but generally if the hours would be 8:30 to 4. But I would say that full-time is nearly 95% of what special schools ask for.
Cool, okay. And how can we support a child if parents don't want the child to be diagnosed?
Well, that's a very good question. Very good. And I have come across a number of cases like this, and it can happen for a number of different reasons, right? Like, you know, we obviously live in a very multicultural society, and we, you know, have to appreciate that there are some cultures or some backgrounds that find having a child with special needs quite difficult to accept, and therefore that there is some resistance around getting an official diagnosis. If you have a child who hasn't got an official diagnosis, firstly, they wouldn't be in a special school, but you have to make reasonable adjustments for them to access the national curriculum. And so I would deploy some of the techniques that you can use for a child who has got a diagnosis. Let's say it's autism, for example. If you have a child who has undiagnosed autism, or you think that they're on the spectrum, I would start implementing visual timetables. I would start implementing, you know, emotional regulation zones. I would start potentially using timers. So if you're finding that children really struggle with transitions from one activity to another, I always use a sand timer or a digital timer, something like that, where I say, okay, maths is going to finish in 5 minutes. Then you switch over the sand timer. And then you might have a different sand timer for 2 minutes. You switch over that sand timer, and then you have another one for 1 minute, and it counts them down, and they know exactly what's going to happen. A lot of those techniques I will cover in different workshops, because there's far too many to go through now, but I would treat them as if they've got the diagnosis, and then whether they're going to get that diagnosis is between the parents, the local authority, and the school.
Cool, thanks. And can you tell us what the difference between primary diagnosis and secondary diagnosis is, please?
Yeah, so primary diagnosis is the main condition that they have that affects their learning. It doesn't happen for all children, but for example, I have had a lot of children on the autism spectrum who then have a secondary diagnosis of speech and language disorder or speech and language needs or delay. I also have quite a few children with what did he have? I can't remember what the name of the condition is now, but where they would have let's say cerebral palsy, which obviously affects movement and sort of muscle tone, that then also can delay their speech, or it can delay their muscle strength as well. So they would have difficulties in mobility, for example, or hypertonia, which is hyperextendable joints, etc. So the primary one is what affects them mostly, and then anything subsequent to that is a secondary.
Cool. And somebody's asking if they'll be able to print the slides.
You should be. Obviously you can't get the video, sadly, but yes, we will send the slides around afterwards, and so you'll receive that tomorrow morning, I think. So you should be able to print off the slides then, make any notes, etc. If you want to see a really, really great documentary, which is where I got the video from Luke from, there's a 3-part series on BBC iPlayer called A Special School, and it takes you through what life is like in a Scholarderry, and it's honestly one of the most progressive special schools that I've seen in terms of what they make accessible for all of their children. And it gives you a really great insight into how lessons are planned, how lessons are differentiated, and it also shows you like the real family culture and laughs that you can have with some of the children, because honestly some of the things that I've heard children with special needs say are just absolutely hilarious, and you can have a real good time. And I think one of the nice things as well is that, you know, you can be quite, you know, pally, almost like friendly with the children, because obviously you're helping them learn social skills as well. So you don't want to come across always as that authoritarian teacher type. You know, you can have a real laugh with the children. I think that show shows it perfectly.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Someone was asking about the base level training. What base level training comes and can be completed after level 2 training?
After level 2, do you mean like NVQ level 2?
I believe so, yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure on NVQs and stuff like that. I think that the training that a special school will provide you is kind of everything that you would need to be able to support their students. I'm trying to think of what the CPD we did. So when I first got into special needs, I don't have when I first got into special needs, I had no qualifications. I only had my GCSEs. So I don't have an NVQ level 2. I don't have a degree in childhood studies or special ed. I have my psychology degree, which is focused in autism. But the training that I did when I first went into a special school was about autism awareness, epilepsy awareness, manual handling, so physically how you can move children in and out of wheelchairs, safeguarding, well-being, and medication. Also feeding. Feeding was a really interesting one. Feeding and medication administration. That came slightly later because you do have to have a bit more experience in supporting children on medication. But those are the only things that I was taught or learned about. And then it all comes from experience, because, you know, we can teach you everything theoretically in the world, but until you're on the floor with children and working with them day in, day out, then that's the best training that you'll ever have, is working with them. Cool. I mean, if anyone, like I said, if anyone's got any other questions or want to talk to me personally, then just email me, and if we can either, you know, exchange over emails, or we can arrange a time to talk and answer some more questions about that then. But yeah, please do get in touch, and also let me know if you're now willing to open up to working in special ed.